At exactly 9:58 a.m., Elaine Monroe walked into the boardroom uninvited, and silence hit like a slap. A dozen executives stopped mid-laugh as she laid a thick file on the glass table, her voice calm but lethal. "I own this company, and I'm here to clean up the mess you made." In that instant, the woman they'd ignored for decades became their reckoning. Hi, everyone. Today we're starting with a story that unfolds in a place where ambition usually drowns out conscience and appearances define power. But what if I told you that the most powerful person in the room was the one everyone ignored? What if the quietest voice turned out to be the one that shattered the entire system? This is a story about legacy, injustice, and an extraordinary woman named Elaine Monroe who stood up against greed, prejudice, and erasure and won. This could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Let's begin. It was precisely 9:58 a.m. when the double doors of the Langston and Cumbers executive boardroom swung open. The sound wasn't loud, no dramatic bang or shout, just the soft whoosh of perfectly balanced hinges, barely enough to turn heads. But it was enough, because the woman who stepped inside wasn't supposed to be there. Not in their eyes, not in their carefully protected space. Elaine Monroe stood at the entrance wearing a simple navy blouse, tan slacks, and a pair of well-worn leather shoes that whispered of long walks and longer years. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned neatly into a bun. No designer bag, no glinting jewelry. Just a folder in her left hand, thick and fraying at the edges, from years of handling. The men in the room, $50 haircuts, six-figure watches, and Ivy League grins, looked up in confusion, then derision. Excuse me, ma'am," Brandon Langston, the current CEO, chuckled. "This is a private board meeting." Elaine didn't respond. Not immediately. She stepped forward, walking calmly between the rows of black leather chairs, her shoes making soft taps on the polished marble floor. A junior executive leaned toward a colleague and whispered with a smirk, "Maybe she's here to refill the coffee, or deliver a maintenance notice," someone else murmured. But Elaine kept walking, past the looks, past the smirks, past the lifetime of being overlooked. And when she reached the center of the glass conference table, she laid the folder down gently yet firmly enough that it made a soft thud. The room hushed. She looked up. Her voice was clear, steady, and unshaken. "My name is Elaine Monroe. I am the majority shareholder of Langston & Co." The silence was instant and thick. One could almost hear the blood drain from Brandon's face. His eyes flicked to the folder, then back to her. That's impossible," he said flatly. "My father, Jonathan Langston, was the founder. Everyone knows that." Elaine gave him a look that had no anger, only quiet certainty. "Your father and I co-founded this company 35 years ago, and I have every piece of documentation to prove it." Brandon snorted. "This is ridiculous." Security. But one of the board members, Carolyn Blake, a sharp gray-haired woman who'd been on the board for 2 decades, raised her hand. "Wait," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Let her speak." Elaine nodded, flipping open the folder. Inside, notarized documents, original partnership contracts, SEC filings, share transfer certificates, and at the very top, a handwritten letter in careful script signed by Jonathan Langston. Brandon lunged forward. "This is a joke. It's forged." Elaine didn't flinch. "Call your legal team. I'll wait." Someone already had. Within minutes, Langston & Co. His in-house counsel arrived, 3 attorneys in tailored suits, eyes narrowed. They examined the documents, scanned the signatures, cross-checked registration numbers. Half an hour passed. When the lead attorney finally looked up, his expression was pale, stunned. "They're authentic," he said. "Every single one." The air was sucked out of the room. Brandon sat back down slowly, as if the weight of his own ignorance had just hit him in the chest. Elaine looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes without blinking. "For decades," she said quietly, "I remained silent. I stayed in the background, not because I lacked a voice, but because the world wasn't ready to hear it. But today, with layoffs looming, pensions in jeopardy, and this company hollowed out by greed, I am done being silent." Brandon's voice cracked. "You've never been part of any strategic planning, never contributed to the growth." Elaine cut him off, still calm. "I was here when your father couldn't get a loan. I was the one who wrote the first check that kept this company alive. While you were still in grade school, I was working double shifts to fund our first prototype. You grew up believing this company was your birthright, but I was there before it had a name." She paused. "And now I'm taking it back." The boardroom wasn't just quiet. It was still like a held breath. Somewhere down the hallway, an assistant dropped a stapler, and the sound echoed faintly through the walls. Brandon's knuckles whitened around the arms of his chair. His eyes darted toward his closest allies on the board, but found only confusion, hesitation, and fear. Elaine straightened the folder and took a step back. "I'm not here to gloat," she said. "I'm here to fix what's broken. This company has lost its soul, and I intend to help it find its way back." And with that, the woman they had dismissed as a nobody and intruder became the single most powerful presence in the room. 35 years earlier, Langston & Co. had no glimmering headquarters, no private jets, and no name recognition. It was a small, desperate operation running out of a converted warehouse on the east side of Cincinnati. There was no central heating, just two space heaters that rattled in winter, and no investors lined up to write checks. Back then, it was called Langston Industrial Labs, and its future was hanging by a thread. Elaine Monroe was 27, an engineer top of her class at Ohio State, and one of the only black women in her graduating cohort. She'd applied to over 50 jobs after college. Most firms wouldn't even offer an interview. The ones that did politely suggested she might be better suited for support roles. She never forgot those words. Not because they hurt, but because they lit a fire that never went out. She met Jonathan Langston at a local engineering conference in Dayton. He was charismatic, full of ideas, and wildly broke. His pitch for a compact, eco-efficient manufacturing processor was brilliant, but completely unbacked. No bank would lend to him. No investors would touch his plan, not without more credibility. That's where Elaine came in. After 3 conversations, Jonathan confessed he was about to shut it all down. Elaine looked him in the eye and said, "Don't." She handed him a check. Everything she had saved from years of working part-time through college. Enough to cover payroll, rent, and materials for the next prototype cycle. He blinked in disbelief. "Elaine, I can't take this. You don't even know if this will work." She smiled gently. "You don't either. But if it does, I want to build it with you. And I want my stake even if no one ever sees my name." That night they forged a private agreement. Elaine would hold a 51% ownership stake. On paper, hidden. Because as Jonathan admitted with shame, "No one will give us funding if they know a black woman owns the majority. It's not right. But it's real." Elaine didn't flinch. "I don't care if the world knows me or not. I just want to make something that matters." And so they did. In the first few years, she was everywhere. Prototyping machines, writing code, pitching quietly from behind the curtain. She trained the first hires, filed for patents, and kept the books when there was no finance department. But she never once appeared in press photos, never stood at the podium, never sat at the front of the investor luncheons. Because in those days, visibility meant vulnerability, especially for a woman like her. And so she watched silently as Jonathan became the face, the visionary founder, the man with charisma and grit. But behind the scenes, Jonathan always gave Elaine credit, always thanked her privately. He knew the truth, and so did she. When the company finally broke through with a government contract in year 7, everything changed. Money came pouring in, offices expanded, and Jonathan, grateful but overwhelmed, remained true to their agreement. He quietly reinforced her 51% ownership with SEC filings, a notarized internal agreement, and an envelope with a letter he said was only to be opened if this place ever lost its soul. That letter, now yellowed with time, was the same one Elaine placed on the boardroom table decades later. But after Jonathan's sudden death from a heart attack at 61, everything changed again. His only son, Brandon, inherited the CEO title in less than 48 hours. He arrived fresh out of Harvard with a $6,000 watch of private equity vocabulary and no respect for legacy. While Jonathan built things, Brandon monetized them. While Jonathan took meetings with engineers, Brandon took yachts to networking retreats. At the memorial, Brandon didn't speak to Elaine, not even once. He gave a polished speech about his father's vision and the power of family businesses. Elaine stood in the back. No name badge, no flowers sent, no seat reserved. The message was clear: she was invisible now, But that never stopped her from showing up. Over the next decade, Elaine would walk the halls quietly, not as a board member, not as an executive, but as a visiting consultant or archival reviewer. She kept her head down, listened, took notes, and saw the signs. Bonuses growing while staff salaries stagnated. Research departments quietly downsized. Legacy engineers pushed into early retirement. Brandon's inner circle, mostly men with last names from country clubs, took over everything. Elaine said nothing, but she noticed everything. She tracked the Shell LLCs suddenly showing up on invoices. She watched the company's pension fund shrink while executive retreats became more lavish. And she documented it all, quietly, meticulously. Year after year, no one saw her. At the front desk, she was asked to wear a visitor badge. In elevators, she was ignored by men holding half her qualifications and 10 times the ego. She was mistaken for HR staff, for admin, for a guest. Not once did anyone say, "Welcome back, Ms. Monroe," because in their eyes, she had never truly been here. And yet, every time she walked through those revolving glass doors, she felt it. The weight of the blueprint in her bones, the wiring in the walls, the echoes of long nights drafting patents and proofing reports by hand. Langston and Co. had forgotten her, but she had never forgotten Langston and Co. It wasn't until she overheard Brandon's plan to lay off nearly 700 employees, without warning, without severance, and with no just cause that she opened Jonathan's envelope for the first time in 30 years. The handwriting trembled but remained legible. "Elaine, if you ever see this place losing what we built, you have every right to step in. Use your voice. Use your proof. I trust you more than anyone. Always did." Jonathan. That night she didn't sleep. She took every document from the fireproof box under her bed, printed records, filed forms, SEC filings, and a backup USB drive. She ironed her blouse, packed her file, and circled the board meeting on her calendar. Because silence had protected them long enough. Tomorrow, it would protect no one. The morning of the board meeting arrived clear and still, with an odd chill in the late April air. Elaine Monroe didn't need a driver, an escort, or a formal invitation. She carried only her black leather satchel, the same one she'd used for years, with the zipper slightly frayed at the edge, and the folder she had assembled piece by piece over decades. Inside the towering glass headquarters of Langston & Co., everything looked polished and pristine. Fresh coffee brewing near the elevators, a receptionist with perfect hair and a mechanical smile. Digital screens displayed the company's soaring stock prices and upcoming partnerships. But underneath the glossy calm, storm clouds gathered. In the boardroom on the 27th floor, Brandon Langston stood at the head of the table, pacing fingers, drumming against the arm of a leather chair. Behind him, a projector displayed charts and a list of proposed departmental cuts. The phrase "strategic layoff phase 1" hovered in bold blue letters. "Let's not sugarcoat it," Brandon said coolly. "We trim the fat now, or this company bleeds later." There were murmurs of agreement from his inner circle. Half the board nodded along. A few glanced at one another, uneasy but silent. That's when the door opened. Elaine didn't hesitate. She entered, walked to the center, and placed her folder on the table. You've already heard how the laughter died, how the mockery fell silent, how the smugness turned to confusion and then fear. But what came next was something none of them could have prepared for. After the legal counsel confirmed her documents, Elaine turned to Brandon, calm and direct. "I have more," she said simply. Brandon blinked. More, what she opened the folder again and produced a second stack printouts of internal emails, suspicious payment approvals, and inconsistent vendor contracts. She passed them to Carolyn Blake, who scanned them slowly, her brow furrowing. "These show a pattern," Carolyn said. "Diversion of funds, repeated over multiple quarters." Elaine nodded. "Millions moved off the books, through shell companies, misreported on quarterly filings." "That's not true," Brandon snapped. "This is a gross misinterpretation of standard operational flexibility." But before he could launch into a tirade, the door opened again. A young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a slightly trembling hand stepped inside. Marcus. Brandon's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" Marcus Lee, a junior accountant in his late 20s, looked nervous, but resolved. He turned to the room. "I reviewed the ledger discrepancies last quarter," he said. At first I thought they were clerical errors. Then I found duplicate payments to fake vendors. I flagged them. But the next day I was pulled into a closed-door meeting. Brandon told me to stay quiet or I'd be reassigned to non-essential functions. Gasps echoed around the table. I brought my own copies, Marcus added, producing a thumb drive. Elaine stepped aside and gestured for the projector. The IT assistant, confused but compliant, loaded the files. Within seconds, the screen filled with spreadsheets, digital receipts, and routing numbers. Everything matched the timeline Elaine had laid out. I did not want to be part of this, Marcus said, voice shaking. But I couldn't keep watching the company crumble while executives pretended everything was fine. Brandon looked stunned. You're just a junior. You don't understand the broader strategic context. Elaine's voice cut through him like a scalpel. Don't dismiss him. That's how this company got here in the first place. Dismissing the people who care. The board fell into a tense, disbelieving silence. Carolyn Blake leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp. We'll need a full internal audit. Effective immediately. Brandon stood abruptly. You can't just strip authority from me. I'm the CEO. I've carried this company since my father's death. These baseless accusations will destroy shareholder confidence. Elaine didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. You've already destroyed confidence. I'm here to rebuild what matters. She then turned to the board, her gaze unwavering. I formally move to suspend Brandon Langston pending a complete investigation. I invoke my rights as majority shareholder to initiate emergency governance restructuring. Murmurs turned into movement. People began flipping through their documents, whispering to assistants outside the room, calling legal advisors. This isn't happening, Brandon muttered, face flushed. You think the board will side with a woman who's been absent for decades, who's never even held a title? Elaine looked at him, soft but firm. I've never held a title because I was told I didn't need one. But I held the truth, and now everyone sees it. A vote was called. The count wasn't even close. Brandon was suspended 9-2 with one abstention. The board requested Brandon remove himself from the meeting. Security was called, though he left before they arrived, his face contorted into disbelief. The moment the doors closed behind him, Elaine turned to the group. This is not a takeover, she said gently. This is a return to purpose. This company was built to innovate, not exploit. To uplift, not discard. If you'll let me, I'd like to help us get back there. No one objected. Not a single voice dared challenge her now. For the first time in years, Langston & Co. had a leader who truly understood its roots. But Elaine knew the storm wasn't over. Brandon Langston wasn't someone who surrendered easily. And the worst was yet to come. The days that followed Brandon Langston's suspension were anything but peaceful. He didn't leave quietly. He didn't fade into the background with his reputation in ruins. No, Brandon did exactly what Elaine expected. He declared war. By the end of that same afternoon, Elaine's photo, snapped as she walked out of the boardroom, was plastered across tech blogs and finance tabloids. Mystery woman ousts CEO at Langston & Co. Is this the end of the Langston legacy, hidden shareholder, or corporate coup? And in the comments, a flood of venom. A woman in her 60s. This has to be a joke. Sounds like a diversity stunt. Langston's about to collapse under amateur hour. Elaine didn't flinch. She didn't even react. While Brandon worked every media contact he had, leaking twisted versions of the truth, portraying himself as the victim of a scheming outsider, Elaine returned to work the next morning at 7:03 a.m., unlocked the side entrance with her original employee ID, and sat in the corner office for the very first time. It wasn't about the desk or the view. It was about the door finally opening. Inside, she met with Carolyn Blake and Marcus Lee, along with 3 hand-picked department heads who had shown integrity throughout Brandon's tenure. They called it the Restoration Team, the first crisis payroll. That Friday, hundreds of employees didn't receive their direct deposits. The accounting system was frozen. Emails bounced. Vendor accounts were locked out. Elaine contacted the bank directly. The manager, clearly panicked, revealed that a batch of administrative overrides had been activated by someone with top-level credentials hours after Brandon's removal. He's still in the system, Marcus muttered. He's trying to crash us. Elaine didn't raise her voice. Then we make it clear he can't. She called in Michael Chen, head of IT, and within 2 hours, a cybersecurity firm was on site. Elaine personally walked the agents to the server room. No press, no photos. Just her and the people protecting the backbone of the company. By 4:00 p.m., the system was secured. Payroll was rerouted through an emergency banking channel. Every employee would be paid by Monday. Elaine didn't release a corporate statement. She filmed a video. No green screen, no marketing gloss, just her seated plainly speaking directly into the camera. Some of you may be hearing things in the news, and I want to tell you the truth. Yes, I'm Elaine Monroe. I've been with Langston & Co. since the very first day. I've waited a long time to speak, not because I was afraid, but because I believed this company could still be saved without me. I was wrong. I should have come forward sooner. She paused. If you're an employee, know this. You matter. We're going to fix what's broken. We're going to do it together. And I promise no more secrets, no more exploitation, and no more fear. Not while I'm here. The video spread like wildfire across internal channels. Hundreds of comments poured in from employees. I've worked here 16 years. This is the first time I've ever believed a CEO meant what she said. Elaine, thank you. I didn't know who you were, but I do now, and I'm behind you. Keep fighting. We see you. But Brandon wasn't finished. That Monday, Elaine received an email from a major investor hedge fund rep, East Coast blunt and skeptical. He'd just gotten off a call with Brandon, who warned of an unqualified leadership takeover and a coming shareholder revolt. Within hours, similar calls came in from 4 more funds. Brandon had been busy. Elaine responded to each call personally. No assistance, no form letters. She opened the books. She showed them the padded invoices, the hollow LLCs, the bonuses disguised as travel expenses. She showed them the cost of silence. Then she showed them her plan: reform, investment in real R&D, transparent audits, a return to long-term growth. Most of them hung up with the same phrase, "You've got guts." I'll watch closely. And watch they did. But Brandon's final move wasn't through media or markets. It came as darkness. At 2:12 a.m. that Thursday, Langston & Co.'s primary server center sent out an emergency alert: critical data breach in progress. Network failures, unauthorized logins. Elaine was woken by a call from Michael Chen. It's not a regular attack, he said. This is targeted. Someone left a logic bomb in the core system. It's set to wipe everything. Elaine got in her car. By the time she reached the building, the entire IT team was on site. Michael pointed to a line of code projected on the wall. It's a ransomware clone. Time deletion. It'll erase all payroll records, pension files, R&D blueprints, unless the encryption key is entered within the next hour. Elaine didn't panic. She looked at Marcus. Can you trace the access point? He nodded. Yes. It came from an internal account. One only a few people had access to. Minutes later, they had the name. Logan Price, Brandon's former assistant. Elaine took a breath, then called the FBI. By sunrise, federal agents were at Langston & Co. By noon, Logan Price was in custody. By evening, a warrant was issued for Brandon Langston. The press exploded again. But this time, the headlines had changed: ex-CEO accused of sabotage and fraud. Langston uncovered data saved by whistleblower team. Elaine Monroe praised for cybersecurity response and calm leadership. And in the comments, I used to think CEOs were all the same. Not anymore. Elaine is what leadership should look like. Brandon was arrested the following week, charged with fraud, cybercrime, and corporate sabotage. The empire he thought he owned had officially crumbled. And for the first time in 35 years, Elaine Monroe sat at the head of the table. Not to watch it all fall apart, but to begin the rebuild. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in every corner of the company Elaine Monroe now led. Langston & Co. was no longer just a legacy firm, bruised by scandal. It was a symbol. And Elaine, she wasn't just a CEO. She was the quiet force who had turned an entire institution upside down and pulled it back from the brink with nothing but the truth, a mountain of patience, and a deep, unshakable sense of justice. The board convened one final emergency vote to officially install Elaine as the new CEO of Langston & Co. The decision was unanimous. No hesitation, no abstentions, and no more closed-door games. It was public filmed and live streamed for every employee to see. She didn't deliver a triumphant acceptance speech. That wasn't her style. She simply stood before the board, her voice calm as always, and said, "I accept this responsibility. But I don't carry it alone. This isn't about power, it's about restoring trust. And from that moment on, Elaine went to work. She started with the numbers. A full forensic audit of the company's finances was launched. The results, when published internally, laid bare just how far Brandon Langston's network of deceit had stretched. Dozens of shell companies, fake consulting contracts, luxury retreats filed as employee development. Entire departments were left underfunded while the executive suite had been remodeling their personal offices every 2 years. Elaine didn't just apologize, she took action. Bonuses were frozen for senior leadership. Executive expense cards were deactivated. Every dollar redirected toward rebuilding what had been lost. She then turned to the people. Departments that had once felt like silos became teams again. Engineers were given resources they hadn't seen in a decade. The R&D department, once stripped to the bone, was revived with new grants, fresh hires, and permission to create again. Within 6 months, product innovation had doubled. But her most radical move was personal. Elaine launched the Equity Initiative Employee Stock Ownership Program. Every employee, from janitorial staff to senior developers, was given the opportunity to hold shares in the company. Scholarships for women and students of color. Named after Jonathan Langston, these were awarded annually to underrepresented students pursuing careers in STEM. Transparency first policy. All major leadership meetings were open for observation. Budgets, initiatives, and executive salaries were made visible to the entire workforce. Zero tolerance equity pledge. Any discrimination at any level would be grounds for immediate review and disciplinary action. Elaine signed the policy herself along with the entire board. She even removed the frosted glass doors to the executive wing. If leadership needs to hide behind glass, she told the facilities team, it's not leadership. But perhaps the most symbolic change came when the company unveiled its rebranded logo, a sleek new emblem forged in chrome and light mounted on the wall of the main lobby. Beneath it, etched into a white marble slab in simple gold letters, founded by Jonathan Langston and Elaine Monroe. The company newsletter that month featured a full photo of the new display. Below it, a quote from Elaine: "Truth doesn't shout, it waits. But when it rises, it speaks for generations." And then came the 1-year anniversary of the Boardroom reckoning, the day Elaine had stepped through those doors and changed everything. The entire headquarters gathered in the new open-concept atrium. No stage, no dramatic lighting, just chairs, skylight above, and employees from every level side by side. Elaine wore a deep plum blazer, her silver hair still pinned back with that same no-nonsense clip. She stood in the middle of the room, no microphone needed, and looked at the faces around her. When I first walked into this building, she said, no one saw me. A hush fell. I was the co-founder, but I wore no title. I received no recognition. And for a long time, I let that be enough, because I believed in what we built. But belief without voice can only carry so far. She paused, then added, every company is made of people who are told they don't belong, people whose names don't get called, people who are written off, overlooked, or ignored. But they're the ones who carry the weight. They're the reason any of this exists. And starting today, this will always be their company too. The applause didn't come in one burst. It built like a wave, slow, then louder, then rising to something thunderous. After the speech, dozens of employees lined up to shake her hand, some with tears, others with stories. And one young woman just out of college held out a slip of paper, a scholarship application. She whispered, I never thought I could do this, until I read about you. Elaine smiled, took the form, and said, let's get to work. Langston & Co. had emerged from the ashes, not just stronger, but transformed. Applications to join the company tripled in less than a year. Investor confidence returned. Profits rose, but more importantly, so did morale. And the boardroom, where it all began, the chair where Brandon once sat was removed, replaced with a simple frame photo of Elaine standing beside Jonathan Langston in 1989, blueprint in hand. No one could deny it anymore. She had always been there, and now the world finally saw her,